started. Welcome, everyone. I am Ryan Lindsay. I am the Assistant Dean for Social Work. I am also an Associate Professor of Practice, and I chair the Mental Health Concentration. So I get the opportunity to share some of my knowledge as both a practitioner as well as an administrator, and some information related to the various levels of practice in social work. So a little bit, just to orient you a little bit to our journey today. So I'll introduce our panel in a moment. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the various levels of social work practice. And then I'm going to open up the panel to some specific questions I'm going to ask the panel. And then I'm going to open up the floor to you all to ask questions. So be thinking about questions through this presentation to be able to get answered by our faculty and student representatives. So I would like to introduce you to our panel. To my left is Gary Parker. Gary is the Associate Dean of External Affairs and the Director of the Clark Fox Policy Institute at the Brown School. And he brings extensive experience to the school and the classroom in community organizing, policy, and global social work practice with an emphasis on social justice and racial equity. And next to Gary is Dr. Carolyn Lesorogol. Her research focuses on the international social development, to understand how dynamic social change processes affect the well-being of families and communities. She brings her extensive experience implementing capacity-building community programs in Kenya to the International Social and Economic Development Concentration. And then to the left is Molly. Molly, I forget your last name.
Dwyer.
Welcome. Can you introduce yourself? Because I don't have a bio on you.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'm Mollie Dwyer. I am a current student. Is this on?
It is not.
It's not on.
Just
Okay.
click the
Well,
button.
I feel cool holding it, I guess.
We want it on.
There
There we go.
So I'm a current student, second year. I will graduate in a month.
Yeah.
And I am, I'm excited.
That's where you're.
Yeah. And I'm studying social and economic development, domestic, and I'm interested in policy, and I'm from St. Louis. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah. So a little bit is, to start, is talk a little bit about the various levels of social work practice, but also the intersection between each of these. You know, the thing that makes that social work unique is that the focus is not only on an individual, it's an individual in context. And context may mean an organization, it may be a community, it may be a family, but it also means a society. And levels of where we want to kind of target our practice and intervention, but also our understanding, can in some ways be thought about as micro, mezzo, or macro. Where at the micro level is really about that change, that case level change, the individual in front of you. How do I help someone resolve their PTSD symptoms? Where mezzo practice might look at how am I going to work with communities to help solve a community issue, or within organizations, because even if I'm interacting with somebody at the individual level and helping this person resolve PTSD symptoms, I might be working within an organization, and the organizational structure is critically important to my ability to do my job, but also support long-term funding and sustaining of programs. And then beyond that, then we have policy practice that is going to influence how well an organization and how well I can actually engage in the kind of practice that I do. So our social work program is really based on the idea that you're going to get exposure to how to assess, how to engage, how to intervene, how to evaluate at these multiple levels, but also understanding that none of them exist in isolation of each other. And so the great thing about our program is that it's really designed to give you preparation with the minimum standards of social work practice to take on new jobs. And so it's just a way to kind of think about orienting around potential jobs. Here are just a few options that you might be thinking about. So maybe, you know, at the individual or the environment level, you might practice as a clinical social worker, something that I do, or work as a military social worker, either in the VA and the VA system or with active duty. Maybe you're going to actually move to the mezzo level and work within small and mid-sized groups as a community program coordinator, or actually take on leadership or organization, or maybe actually you're wanting to enter the social work field at more of this large-scale, systematic kind of reform as a policy analyst or as a lobbyist or in some way, shape, or form, in those levels of practice. And although these are up here, they look like very different categories. You have to be prepared to work at all levels of practice because they're not just so cut and dry. The work you do at a micro level is very similar to the work that you do at the mezzo level and to the macro level. And in a lot of ways, we actually are training you in competencies to practice at every single level. We're giving you strategies for engagement at each level. We're giving you strategies for assessment at each level. We're giving you interventions and how to think about interventions, how to find interventions, how to develop interventions at various levels. And then most importantly, how to evaluate. Because there's no point in doing something if we don't know there's an effect of it. And we need to ensure that we're not doing harm, because we can. We can actually make things worse. So evaluation and having that skill set is a really important part, because we're dealing with humans. And we want to ensure that what we're doing is ethical and bringing about the impact and change that we're desiring to work towards. So we do that here in the Round School, kind of based how our curriculum is set up. So all social work programs are actually designed for a master's degree to be generalist programs, meaning we're preparing you to practice at each level. So our foundation curriculum, the reason why you have to take all these foundation courses is not only because we as a school have decided these are the minimum content areas that you have to understand in order to practice this social work, but our accrediting body, the Council on Social Work Education, directs the standards for our profession to say that these are the skills future social workers need to be able to engage in when they graduate from programs. So our foundation curriculum really sets the standard for the holistic practice. Where then you're going to decide on, I want to go in depth into one area or another, and that's at the concentration level. Concentrations are all designed similarly, where there's a policy course, there's a theory course, there's practice methods courses, and everybody has to take evaluation, and everybody has to take a leadership and management course. And so this sets the kind of framework for each of the concentration. But that concentration is really directed by what is the impact you want to make. And each concentration has more or less an emphasis or an equal emphasis on each level of practice. And so you'll work with both concentration chairs and your advisors to help you settle on what's the direction that makes most sense for you. So as a school, we actually have a pretty, we have a lot of options for you to choose from, which actually on one hand is amazing, on the other hand it's overwhelming. It's like, how do I settle on something? But this is really, speaks to the level of expertise that we have here at the Brown School, and also allows you to really cater your career, your trajectory, your academic trajectory here towards really your first job. So I always think about an MSW program as these are the skills that you're putting together to prepare you for your first job and your first 5 years of practice. Because all of our career trajectories look differently. And what you'll probably find is when you enter this program and then when you leave this program, you're going to have a very different understanding of what social work is. And also your eyes are going to be open to different types of practice. And your entire career, you're going to be influenced by that. Where Carolyn's research in Kenya was something that I never even thought about when it comes to sustainability in Africa about community and social development, because I've been practicing as a mental health professional for a very, very long time. And from that, it led me to actually start thinking more about global interventions for mental health, where in resource-strapped countries without a lot of education systems in place, no one's going to have my level of training. How do we create and intervene and actually get mental health interventions in global countries? I never even thought about that until I actually came on faculty here. And so even as a faculty member, I'm continuing to learn. So this is one of the amazing things about the Brown School is that there's divergent and also lots of synergies between the work that we do across programs. So that's just a little bit to lay the foundation for the panel so that we kind of have an understanding of kind of where we're going. But I think the first question to our faculty is really, from your perspective, how is the work that is being done at the Brown School uniquely making an impact at each of those levels of practice? Either one can go first.
Okay. All right, thanks. Again, my name is Carolyn Lesorogol. I'm a professor here, and as Ryan mentioned, I am in charge of the International Social Economic Development concentration and actually global programs at the school. My own work has been primarily in Kenya, working on strengthening livelihoods of communities there through participatory development work and also more basic research. So I think there are two things I want to do in answering this question. First, just very quickly mention a few of the career paths for our students who do global work. There are a wide variety of career paths in terms of different kinds of organizations. So we have students who end up working in small, local, nonprofit or non-governmental organizations in many different countries around the world. We have some students who end up working with international NGOs, some who work for government development agencies like USAID. We've had students who work there. Some who end up working with global organizations like UN organizations or the World Bank, for example. So there are a variety of places where students end up in doing global social development work. And our international students often also end up returning to their home countries, and many of them have played important roles in ministries of social welfare or child protection. Some of them were the founders of many of their policies in their countries along those lines. So just to give you a little sense of the trajectory for global social work and social development. And then in terms of the work that our school does, I mean, there are a lot of senses to say our work. I mean, on one hand, we have our whole curriculum that prepares students, as Ryan has sort of pointed out, the different aspects of theory, practice, policy. So it's a pretty comprehensive approach. In the global space, we have international practicum where you go and do hands-on work with an organization. And then I wanted to point to a few examples of the research that our faculty are doing internationally and how those are at the three kind of micro, mezzo, macro level. So at the micro level, we have faculty who are doing work, for example, on child development accounts, which is an approach to savings for future education and entrepreneurship that was developed here at the school through the Center for Social Development. And now they've disseminated that approach internationally. So there are programs in Israel and China and South Africa and South Korea that have kind of adapted that model. And that's really an individual kind of intervention to assist families with saving. Another center called iChad works on a family intervention for economic strengthening for HIV-affected families in Uganda, led by our faculty member, Fred Sewamala. We have another new center led by our dean and Fred called the Smart Africa Center that works on behavioral health, like Ryan was talking about. How do you provide behavioral health in low-resource settings? And they're doing that in Kenya, Uganda, South Africa, and Ghana. So we also have a faculty member, Dr. Ayanati, who's doing nutrition interventions in Haiti and Ecuador, trying to improve young child nutrition. So those are a few examples of research and interventions at the micro level. At the mezzo level, most of my own research and practice work has been at this level, so understanding communities, engaging communities through participatory processes to plan for themselves for how they would like to bring change in their communities, and then facilitating those processes. So I've worked on that a lot in Kenya, and also done some work in Tanzania and Madagascar on these approaches. We have a faculty member, Dr. Trani, who's working, in fact he left for Pakistan 2 days ago, and he has a project there which is working on improving the educational experience for children with disabilities in Afghanistan and Pakistan. We have another faculty member who works in Brazil and other countries in South America, Professor Reyes, on physical activity and health in the community, the role of the urban environment on physical activity and health. So those are a few examples at the kind of mezzo community level. And then at the macro level, we think more about policy or national programming. We come back again to the example of child development accounts. One of our faculty members, Michal Brinstein-Weiss, has been successful in encouraging Israel to adopt this strategy as a national policy, and they've begun implementing that. Professor Ayanati, who works on nutrition, is working with the Haitian government, and together with our school has established the first bachelor's level program in public health. They didn't have a bachelor's program in public health. I think they had one master's program in public health. So they have started in the last year the first program in public health in the country, and our faculty are assisting with implementing that program. So again, going back to Professor Trani's work on education and disability, he's done a lot of work over many years in Afghanistan on disability policy, which you can imagine in a country that's had war for so many years, the challenges of disability. So working there to help them develop a disability policy as well. So you can see many faculty are doing work that kind of ranges interventions that are very local, and coupling that with a national or even a global level policy. So those are a few examples of kind of the impact of work that's being done here.
Thank you, Gary.
Wow, that's a lot. There's work being done all over the globe. That's really amazing. First, welcome and congratulations on your acceptance, because they don't just let anybody in this school. So you guys must be really smart. Right. So welcome, and we hope that that you will choose to join us, and we think we have a lot to offer you to really, expand your educational experience, not only academically but personally. There are lots of different affinity groups here, and lots of ways to get engaged in the school community, but also in the greater community in St. Louis. I should say I'm relatively new to this. I've been here about a year and a half, and I absolutely love living in St. Louis. I moved from Brooklyn, New York, where I was for 26 years, and people say, how could you leave Brooklyn and go to St. Louis? Are you kidding? I wish I had known about St. Louis 10 years ago. I would have moved here 10 years ago. That being said, I want to tell you just a little bit about the Clark Fox Policy Institute. We function more on that mezzo-macro level. And the Institute it's brand new as well. We're actually approaching our very first anniversary at the end of this month. We are 1 year old, so that means we're organizational infancy, and we're still crawling, but one day we hope to grow up to be an Olympic runner. What we do at the Clark Fox Policy Institute is that our mission is to advance social and economic justice and racial equity for children and the adults who care for them. And the way that we do that is we capitalize on all of the great research that you were just hearing about. We take those research findings, and then what we do is we translate those research findings into evidence-informed policy. Policy that's based in truth and fact, not policy that's based on ideology or opinion. Like, this is and no matter what policy you want to make sure that it is grounded in solid data. And that just ensures that it's more successful in its implementation, and that it will be more likely to be sustainable. So we issue a lot of different policy briefs on different issues that are impacting St. Louis and the greater region, and we work with a lot of the institutes and researchers that you just heard of. And I'll give you a great example of some of the impact that the school and the Institute has had. We recently, part of the Institute's mission is just to convene stakeholders and have discussions about policy. So we brought together healthcare providers from across Missouri in this event called Transforming Missouri's Healthcare. And we also invited state policymakers to participate in that event. And the goal of that event was just to hear from healthcare providers what are the what's the low-hanging fruit? What policies could we change on a state level that will immediately improve the lives of the populations that you're serving? That was our only objective. And how do we do that and reduce cost? Because the state is always looking for opportunities to cut costs, and we want to help them do that while also increasing the quality of care. One of the issues that came up, which I think was really interesting, is New York, or the Medicaid program here in Missouri does not reimburse for physical therapy. And what that means is that there was a legislator, this is actually a great story, a legislator stood up and said that Medicaid should not be reimbursing for massages. So what happened was they removed the ability for people to get physical therapy. What's the end result of that policy maker's decision? Because that was a decision based on opinion. When populations would have an injury, or they would have a hip or knee replacement, and they needed to work through that injury, and they needed to go to physical therapy, the option for those who could not afford it was, the only option for them was to move immediately into pain management, because it bothered them and they did not learn how to work through that pain and heal correctly. As a result of moving those folks directly into pain management, the number of opioid users in the state increased substantially. And we believe that this contributed to part of the opioid epidemic. So we reach out to the governor's director of Medicaid and said that, and gave them a policy brief that said these are the policy recommendations that we're recommending, and this was one of them based in fact. The governor now just a week ago released a statement that he is asking for a waiver from the federal government so that they can now reimburse for physical therapy. So this is a wonderful example of how the work that's being done here at the Brown School is going to have an impact on the state level that will improve the lives of folks who are suffering from injuries and no longer need to be moved into pain management, but can actually get the treatment that they need, and it will help them become well. Now, I know you're thinking, well, that's great, but I'm not a healthcare provider yet. I'm not the president and CEO of a healthcare corporation yet, but I see you all in those positions one day. As a student, there are ways in which you can get involved with the Clark Fox Policy Institute, and I hope that you will consider doing that, because it's a great opportunity to think, how do I connect my clinical interests to being a high-impact agent of change? Because that is why you're attracted to the social work profession. You're interested in improving lives of children, families, individuals, pushing them towards social justice, pushing them towards equity, towards economic justice, and racial justice. So the way that you can do that is to better understand how policy impacts on a large scale. We have a program called the Graduate Policy Scholars. It's a Journey to Policy Scholarship. And the way that works, students apply, and students that are accepted into that program are issued what we call a passport to policy. It's an actual physical passport that we give you. And then we give you something which we like to call a map to policy destinations. All right, it doesn't look like a map, but you can't have a passport without an actual, at least referring to a map. And on that map, there are all of what we call policy destinations. These are experiential and academic journeys that you can get to better understand how policy connects to the work that you care about. So a policy destination may be write an op-ed about a particular issue that's important to you. Show up to a local community meeting and write a reflection about the policy implications. It might be work with a community-based organization in supporting one of their efforts. Write a policy brief, and if it's really good, we'll publish it through the Institute, and that's something that you can put on your resume. As you go through that journey, you get a stamp in your passport for every time you complete one of those, arrive at your journey, at your destination, your policy destination. When you receive 12 stamps, you become inducted into the Institute as a graduate policy scholar. We are going to be having our very first induction ceremony next month, and you'll be able to join a growing cohort over time of social workers and public health professionals that care about policy, care about high impact change, and we are going to be creating a national network of change makers. So I hope that's something that you will consider doing and consider getting involved in some way. If you're not interested in becoming a graduate policy scholar, dive into these policy classes. Even if you right now are thinking, I'm going to be a clinician, I'm going into private practice, I've got my trajectory all mapped out. You know, I thought I had to. I went into social work school thinking I was going to be a clinician, and really got turned on by policy, by research, by high impact change. And if those are the things that are of interest to you, this is the perfect place for you to do your studies. So I welcome any questions that you may have, either during the Q&A or afterwards. And happy, as you can see, I get very excited talking about policy and research. So I welcome it. And congratulations again to all of you.
And I'm going to take it back to kind of more for those that are really coming here for that direct practice preparation. This school, 28% of its students are in the mental health concentration. Mine. These are all my little minions. And our school, this Brown School, has more options for coursework within the mental health and direct practice and clinical interventions than any other school, a social worker across this country. And so I'm very, very proud of both the size, the strength of our direct practice work for those that want to enter the field at that level. And I will have to admit also, I'm currently going through a little bit of an identity crisis because after practicing for almost 20 years and seeing clients for 20 years, this is the first year that I have not seen a client. And a part of that is because of policies. What I have learned is that the access to evidence-based treatments is not the same for all people. And it's not good enough even for those that can afford and can access the service. The availability of it isn't there. But for those that are the most vulnerable and do not have access to this type of care, there's very few places they can get that. And so I've been on a journey to learn more about this because we have to create new interventions. And even next week, I have a meeting with a very large managed care organization to talk about what are innovative ways to increase access to care so you can treat those that are exposed to trauma. Because the Medicaid population has large exposure and very limited access to care. And right now, our current system doesn't serve them adequately. And what do we need to think about in terms of actually engaging private organizations, for-profit organizations, having for-profit, government, and nonprofit working together to solve this problem of trauma in our communities? And that it's critically important to understand that policy process in order for you to stand up and pitch to somebody holding the key to access. This is how it should go. And so it's something I'm working towards.
You're hitting your stride, Ryan.
Yes. Now I'm a policy maker, maybe. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Once I solve the problem of vaccine compliance. So I think what I like to do is have Molly tell her story a little bit about kind of what brought her to the Brown School and how did you land on the concentration that you landed on, and what were some of the resources here that helped you make that decision?
Okay. So like I said earlier, my name's Molly, and I'll start with a little context about myself and my interests because I think that's important to this conversation in regards to the intersectionality of all of the different courses that you can do. So in undergrad, I studied business with an emphasis in communication and social entrepreneurship. I was really invested on campus with student government and service corps with a special interest in public transportation for rural communities. And I also had a part-time job working with kids. So I was all over the place with what I was interested in. And I remember having kind of an identity crisis my fall semester senior year, I don't know what I want to do. I have too many ideas about what I should do. And then my advisor said, you should look at the Brown School. And so, to be completely frank, I was like, isn't that a social work school? And he was like, yeah, it is. But in my mind, I had a very narrow idea of what social work was and what it meant. And I was like, I have no idea how my business degree and the things I'm interested in, I don't really understand how that translates. And so for me, he said, my advisor had said they have children, youth, and families, which I think he would really enjoy, and then they have social and economic development, which I think he would enjoy. So I was like, okay. So I went to look at the Brown School, and I met with the chair of the social and economic development domestic side, and I was just like, oh, this fits, this is perfect. I just had no idea it was social work because like a lot of people in growing up, I just had a very one-track mind of what that meant. So when I first came, I was really excited about the idea of working with kids. I worked in a charter school all of last year doing before and after school care programming, and I really liked it. I did practicum with the Starkloff Disability Institute, which is a nonprofit working with folks with disabilities, and we partnered with the special school district, who essentially said, we don't have enough state money, we don't have enough federal money to serve the students in the way we want to, so how can we work with you guys to make that happen? So we did program development while working with the school district, which was really cool. And now this year, I will hopefully be a graduate of the policy program that Aaron was speaking about.
Scholar.
Yeah, and I'm really excited. I remember I took a campaign, they did a campaign crash course last semester, and I took that and I really liked it, and I was like, this campaign thing is what I want to do. And that's actually my job afterwards, and so I'll be working at a political consulting firm in the campaign management side, and so that's a lot of the one-on-one interactions. On campus, I've taken volunteer management, and that's a lot about what it is. It's how do we go from neighborhood to neighborhood and kind of talking about the needs of that neighborhood and how our proposition or our candidate can help with that issue. And so I think that's been really cool because even if you are very macro focused, you still have to have the micro skills to talk to people and to listen, like, what do you want? Because this neighborhood might have a very different need than the neighborhood a mile down the road. And so trying to listen and figure out how can we actually make this candidate work for you, because that's their job, or how can we make this proposition fit the needs that are actually happening. And so I think that's really cool. Again, I am sort of at that micro for my job, or my macro job after graduation, but it was really my micro classes at the beginning that at first really scared me. I remember we had to do one-on-one conversations, and I had to record myself and watch it back and like take notes about weird things I did, things that I shouldn't be doing, and I think while at the time it was very tense for me and stressful, I think I learned a lot from it. So all of that being said, if you do come to the Brown School, and some people do, knowing exactly what you want to do, that's great. But if you aren't really sure where you might fit, that's okay too. That's probably the majority, I'd say, and you'll figure it out. And the good part about a MSW or MPH is that there are so many options. So there's not a one-track result of this is what you'll do, because people are working in political consulting, they're working with children, youth, and families in schools, hospitals, and then you can change your mind throughout because it's a very flexible degree. So, yeah, that's what I have to
And
say.
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. So I'd like to open up the questions to you all. What kinds of questions do you all have for our panel? We're really good at waiting it out too.
It's creating space.
Yes.
So I'm someone who's pretty interested in the clinician job. So can you elaborate some more on what's, like, to me, the most rewarding thing would be like meeting one-on-one with a client,
Yeah.
and then seeing them overcome their depression, for example.
Yeah.
But what's rewarding about like the administration or policy level? Because I know that that's stuff is there.
There's nothing rewarding about it.
So,
Seeing the whole system
yeah.
change.
I'll speak to that because I've been a clinician my entire life, but also I've started an organization and I employ 20 people. We will have served, we've developed our own intervention and are beginning to test that. We will have served our 940th family in the St. Louis region this year. And so I've done kind of all levels of practice with that. And what I would say is that there's nothing that gives me the tinglies more than sitting down with somebody and watching them achieve. There's nothing that gives me that. But I will say that what is profoundly rewarding about administrative work and also other time more community level work is that the impact spreads. And there's levels of reward that come back to you as both a practitioner, because you get to see how communities change, how organizations change, how more than just the person sitting in front of you is changing. And I was very satisfied with that for a big part of my career. And I had some very specific experiences that shifted my trajectory, that led me from basically thinking, you know, I had a lot of privilege to learn something really, really well. But not everybody else has had that privilege. And so my calling shifted, because we have to, if we're gonna actually solve some of these problems at a larger level, I have to look beyond who's sitting in front of me. And so there's reward, it just is a different kind of reward. And then part of it is I never thought, I went to school to be a therapist, I was gonna do mental health services treatment, I had no idea what I was signing up for in my internship, I didn't know what I was doing. I had never really heard of evidence-based treatments, and so I didn't know what I was stepping into, and it just happened to fit. And so, but then over the course of my career, it's just taken different directions, because the impact was, from a social justice standpoint, it wasn't fair. That access is not fair. There are disparities, there's quality gaps, and these must be addressed both at the workforce development, which is where my area of interest is. How do I get you all trained well enough to make the impact? So from a training standpoint, but also once you're out. How do we build professional development programming and workforce development programming to be able to move that forward? And I think that some people stay as a clinician their entire career. And that's the level of impact that is profound, that's their calling. And others, I'm a big dreamer, and I also get distracted easily. And so, I'm not really a follow-through person. So, to stay at something for a long time is really hard for me, but I like lots of challenges. And so, I think each of your perspectives, your personalities, your desired impact really shapes where you find reward. And I think that's how it shifts.
I also, to that point, I was at a function a few weeks ago with someone who worked in HR who had her MSW. And I was just asking her, what do you consider a win at the end of the week, at the end of the day? And for her, as an HR practitioner, she said, I've been advocating for paid leave for our employees for years. And she works for Deloitte, it's an accounting firm. And she said that just passed. And so for her, that was a win, that her company that she's been working for is kind of setting a standard for, we need to really value this, whether you're having children, whether you're sick, anything like that. And so by a big company like that taking a stand and saying, we are going to give our employees this, hopefully that's changing the narrative, or at least setting a different tone for other companies to try to just change the conversation. So I feel like a lot of that, when we vote on different ballot initiatives and things like that, hopefully we're reflecting what's important for that community at that time. And so even just getting a ballot initiative going, hopefully getting something passed that you want to be passed, is just reflective of saying, yeah, okay, as a community 3 years ago, we didn't really talk about this, now it's up for vote, and we're talking about it, we realize there's an issue. So I think like the wins, or like the yes moments, like look a little different, especially depending on what you want to do, whether that's government or whether that's working in corporate. But yeah, I think those look very different. Sometimes they may feel further down the road, but that's just a conversation I had recently that I thought might answer some of your question.
Other questions? Yeah.
So for someone that's interested in policy, I was wondering if you could speak to the value of having a master's in social work and focusing on policy versus getting a master's in public policy.
Yeah, I love that question. One of the great things about having a social work degree is that you, as a social work practitioner, have an understanding of the individual in the environment, which is so critical and often overlooked in public policy making. People, right? You take a people-first approach. And an example of that is, when we're talking about health equity, and we want to say, like, well, why is it, for example, that communities of color have poorer health outcomes than white communities? And we know it's not a genetic thing. We know that it's the fact that where you live, where you work, and where you play matters, and it's going to affect your well-being. And those three things, we call those the social determinants of health. And when you're in an under-resourced community, that is going to impact your health. So poverty is a social determinant of health. It's very clear, and the World Health Organization actually released a policy statement that clearly documented that those populations that have a lower socioeconomic status, the majority of those are communities of color based on hundreds of years of systemic racism. The lower your socioeconomic status, the lower your life expectancy. So being able to address access on a policy level is so critically important. And it is a life or death situation. If you can increase access to healthcare, access to better education, access to asset development, access to being able to build a stronger economic future for your family, you are going to have better health outcomes. You are going to have a longer trajectory in life. So when I think about, and I love that you called it the tinglies, I'm going to steal that from you now. So when I think about what the policy work that gives me the tinglies, is when I'm able to help participate in a policy process, and no one person is responsible for policy change, unless it's the person who actually can make that change. But being a part of that policy process, pushing that discourse forward, whether that be organizing a protest, I love organizing protests. I started off as a scrappy grassroots organizer. Whether that be giving testimony at City Hall. I've gone to City Hall when I lived in New York. I went to City Hall and gave testimony. They were considering a piece of legislation. It was called GENDA, the Gender Expression Non-Discrimination Act. If this bill passed, then individuals could be discriminated against based on their gender identity and expression. Up until then, you could walk into a store, you could apply for housing or a job, and they could say, no, your gender doesn't align with your biogender, so therefore, you're cisgender, therefore we're not gonna hire you. I gave testimony just imploring on how important it was to provide those protections, and then that bill passed. It didn't pass because I gave testimony. It passed because there was a movement, and being a part of that social movement and pushing forward a discourse and advocating for what's right for social justice and racial equity is incredibly and powerfully rewarding.
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
So I think what Gary said is great, and I think two other things I would add is that the comparative advantage of the social work degree, it's not only recognizing things like social determinants of health, but having skills to work with groups of people.
Yeah.
Because that's actually what policy making is. And I think there's an advantage in the social work training compared to at least most programs of public policy are not focused as much on the interpersonal relationships. And then one other very pragmatic thing, which actually a student who's now a doctoral student who went through our program a few years ago, the MSW program, and he said, he went out hoping he wanted to do global work, but for personal reasons had to stay in the US. And he said there was so much utility in actually having an MSW because it's a recognized professional degree in many different contexts, not just clinical contexts or case management contexts, which of course it is, but even in other contexts, like people know what that is and that there are some concrete skills. So I think sometimes social workers have a little bit of an inferiority complex, which they shouldn't, because there are skills there, and if we effectively communicate what those skills are, they're really valuable. And we've seen that because we've placed students in non-traditional placements like She was talking about, we place students in government practicums here locally, and the local governments, some were skeptical at the beginning, like, why would we want a social work student? And then afterwards, like, now we know why we want a social work student. So partly we have to demonstrate that, but I think those are real advantages.
Can I just add too,
that all of those clinical engagement, group work, all of that is necessary in policy process. You have to create the relationships that are going to help you move a cause forward. And the best way to do that is, do you know how to engage properly? If you're learning in your clinical class how to engage with families, you're going to learn also how to engage with elected officials and policymakers. It's the same foundational skill set. Toward that end, for students that are really interested in not only understanding the person and the environment, being a social worker and taking a people-first approach, we have now expanded here at the school a dual degree where you can get, with your MSW, you can get a master's in social policy by staying 1 extra year. And that allows, that program is developed specifically for students that want advanced policy practice skills and need preparation in taking leadership roles as policymakers and leaders of organizations. So you might want to just check into that program and see if it's a good fit.
All right, so we're about out of time, so that's all we get.
Just
I know, I could go all day. I've been going all day, actually. It's just 4 hours, it's good. We're at advice. What did you wish you knew before you started the program?
That's
Molly.
a great question.
Advice to the new student.
Advice to new students.
I guess kind of what I said earlier, just try something you may not know you like. So for example, that was not a good sentence, but for example, last year I took a class, it was a global programs class on refugee empowerment and urban design. And so for part of my job, I'm meeting with the International Institute and we're talking about what the candidate I'll be working for can do for that community. And so for me, it's just helpful to have the MSW and also have a little context with what I'm actually talking about. So even if you are very interested in policy or you're interested in clinical, just try something because the Brown School has so many classes that you may not be interested in at the time, but just take it and see how it goes because you're going to learn a lot with it. And so as we talked about earlier, the options and the flexibility within this program is really cool because you can try something and then when you graduate, you can say, well, I've taken a skill lab in fundraising and grant writing for governments. And people are just kind of like, oh, that's cool. I didn't know that was encompassed within the MSW degree. So just take random classes, use your electives however you want. You know, just kind of have fun with it because you're here, you might as well take something and learn a new skill set or a new theory. Just kind of have fun with your electives.
A piece of advice.
Yeah, I like that. You kind of took mine. I think I would just add to that to take advantage of the resource-rich environment that we have. Sometimes students get a little overwhelmed. We were hearing in the other panel about that. I'm glad you didn't repeat that. But I think there's a lot to take advantage of in addition to classes and practicum. There's conferences, there's events, there's speakers, there's student groups. So really having the full experience, you know, you're investing a lot to be here, so we really want you to get as much out of it as you can. So trying to, you know, really engage at all those levels. And when you do feel like it's a little too much, ask for help. There's also a lot of resources here for help, so there's no reason to be panicky or worried about things. People are here and they're ready to help you when you need it.
She stole mine. My best advice is bring your authentic self. Bring who you are to the table because it matters and it's going to make a huge difference to have your unique perspective at the table because nobody else can offer an insight to the experiences that you've had except you. And that is not only going to benefit you from being able to share, but it's benefiting your class to learn from your wisdom and your experience. And it definitely benefits your instructors. I learned more every semester for my students than I think I actually teach them, but I like to think I teach them something. So please just bring your authentic self and your enthusiasm and embrace the opportunity and the challenge.
I would say on the last bit is that as a mental health practitioner, you're going to have a lot of work to do, but you cannot do it without taking care of yourself.
Self-care.
Self-care, but you have to eat well, you have to sleep, you have to exercise, you need to do all the basic biological interventions that are necessary for impact. That if you do not sleep, you're not going to actually produce a strong impact.
Put your mask on.
It's just not going to happen. So take time for you. Take time to do what you do that helps you deal with a lot of work that's going to be in front of you. The more you take care of your biology, the more you're able to be productive. We often sacrifice ourselves in the service of others. As social workers, that's probably why you're here. You cannot sacrifice yourself in the service of others. So, welcome. I hope you enjoy the rest of the Submitted Students Weekend, and we hope to see you all in the fall. Thank you.